Hello, good evening. My name is Christian Racca. I'm a part of the board of directors of the Plug Association, and Plug is the cultural association that more than 10 years ago created and promoted Posteriors Contest. I'm pretty sure that most of you here are familiar with the Posteriors initiative, but for those of you that don't know this contest, let me spend a couple of words about this great initiative. Well, Posteriors is a social design competition. Of course, we have chosen poster as the medium, and every year since 2010, we ask to the international community of creatives around the world to express themselves about one of the big societal theme or challenge. Let's say from the future of energy to the future of work, education, learning, the food system, inclusion, diversity, and many other topics. During these years, more than 15,000 participants from all over the world, more than 100 countries, participated in our competition and produced the incredible number of 20K posters. This is impressive every time that we mention this number. Participation in Posteriors is super straightforward. I mean, you have simply to read the brief and register yourself on our platform, that is posteriors.org. You can participate individually or in group. Then you have to upload up to 3 posters by the deadline, that this year is August 4. And then you have to wait for the announcement of our international jury that every year select 40 winners for our contest. And among them, 2 of them are the winners of the money prize. And of course, you have to follow us later to see where we promote the artworks that we have selected after the announcement. Well, we are not alone in this initiative, and in fact, this live session, this is the second one after the first one last week, are dedicated to our partners. During these years, we established great partnerships that supported us and helped us in promoting the contest worldwide to grow, to scale the initiative. And last year, you have probably met Michele Posocco from Favini, the paper producer that supported us from the very first edition. And this week is the turn of ITCILO that we'll meet in a couple of seconds. Before introducing our guest speaker, let me delve a few seconds into the 2024 posterior stem, that is mistake, or better, making mistake. And this year we ask our participants to elaborate on mistake, not as a failure, but as an opportunity. Let me say, as a key part in the growth process, not causing a stigma, but part of the creative process. We will discuss this interesting and challenging theme with a special guest this evening, that is Tom Wambeke from ITCILO. Tom Wambeke is the Chief of Learning and Innovation at ITCILO. Tom, how are you? Are you there?
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for inviting me to this session.
Super. Tom, I don't want to make a mistake. Sorry, this is a glitch. But I would prefer that you introduce yourself and your organization, because I'm not sure our audience is aware of what it is ITCILO and your, let's say, your role in the United Nations.
Okay, thanks, Christian. And let's not worry about making mistakes, because that's the core of the session today. Because actually, a lot of people make mistakes in my name. People think usually that I come from South Africa or from one of other African continent with the Wambeke type of name. I'm from Belgium, actually, but I've landed 16 years ago here in Turin. where I joined the International Training Center of the International Labour Organization, which is a specialized UN agency that works under the overall umbrella of working, let's say, decent work and social justice. And the training center that I'm working in is basically trying to organize capacity development initiatives, not only in Turin, but all over the world and in the under 82 member states that we are active in, and training related on, let's say, 42 different expertise areas that can go from international labor standards towards human rights, towards the social and solidarity economy, towards project management. So there's as many expertise areas as there are topics out there, but they all contribute to this larger decent work agenda. So that's it in a nutshell, who I am and where I come from.
Super, super. I mean, it's part of our. I mean, it's our habit to discuss the theme with our partners, and so even in this case, we discussed and we presented, let's say, a group of topics to all our partners before deciding the final theme for this year's posteriors edition. I would like to ask you, or to, let's say, express, say, your opinion when we decided to address the theme of the mistake. What is your initial reaction to this decision?
It was definitely not a mistake. So I think it was a good choice that you have made, because errors, mistakes, they always remain a little bit at the margin. You know, as you have seen also, culture, it's something that maybe we want to park because in this perfect society, or at least from the outside, this is something that is maybe always considered a bit, not really at the center stage. It's something that we would like to avoid. That's what you learn also at school: avoid mistakes, avoid errors. While if you look at from, let's say, a 360 degrees perspective to errors and to mistakes, there's a massive amount of things that we can learn from. And it's a bit what I like about poster heroes in general. You start from the topic, and the topic seems simple, but then if you look in society on how people think about the topic, it's rather very binary. It's either good or bad, or it's either 0 or 1. While through, let's say, the hundreds and people that participate with these poster designs, you create a whole set of new visions through these visuals, and it also enriches the vocabulary, at least the visual vocabulary, but also conceptually on how we think about a specific topic. And that's why I'm very curious how all these artists, illustrators, creatives will think about errors, not only from, let's say, the topic itself, but yeah, as you mentioned, will have more than 100 different countries, which means more than 100 different cultures. So globally, locally, which means also different languages. And would be very interested to see that from that perspective, and to see what we can learn from that, and hopefully also get new ideas, new insights through this rich competition.
And we are very, very curious too, because every here, the, let's say, our job is simple at the end, no? Because we put a big societal challenge on the table, and we ask to our creatives around the world, okay, you have to do a poster about this. Every here is something new, and we receive something that is unexpected, or we are surprised about the interpretations by our authors. So even this year, I'm sure that we will discover many new, let's say, thoughts or opinions about the theme of the mistake. Well, given your role at International Training Center, and also your expertise in innovation, I would like to focus a bit on the importance of mistake in innovation. To set the ground, just as a starting point for the future discussion, I selected a video from YouTube, so you can easily find it, and there are many of them. Presenting some of the, let's say, most important innovations in the history that the core have a mistake or that are coming from mistakes. So I would like to Alicia, that is in the background of this session.
Everyday life has been made easier thanks to inventions that many of us take for granted. Some of the greatest inventions took years to develop, and during that process it also led to some amazing mistakes. Sometimes innovation can come unexpectedly. In this video, we will have a look back at some of the inventions created by mistake. The Slinky is one of the greatest toys of all time. There have been kids from multiple generations that have played with this since they were first sold on the market in the 1940s. But did you know that this wonderful toy was actually invented by accident? A naval engineer named Richard James was trying to develop a spring that would support and stabilize sensitive equipment on ships. While he was working on this project, one of his springs fell off a shelf and kept moving. As he watched the spring continue to move, it hit him that this new invention could really make a great toy. His wife came up with the name Slinky, and the rest is history. It's difficult for many of us to imagine a life without chocolate chip cookies, but they certainly were not always around. We all have one person to thank for this tasty treat, which is Ruth Graves Wakefield. She was the owner of the Toll House Inn, and she decided to bake some chocolate cookies for her guests. Wakefield chopped up a block of semi-sweet chocolate from Nestle in hopes of it melting and then spreading evenly throughout the cookie. However, it did not happen as she hoped, but it certainly became a hit in the long run. Percy Spencer was an engineer at Raytheon in 1945 when he accidentally made a discovery that would change cooking forever. He was experimenting with a radar-related vacuum tube when he noticed that the candy bar in his pocket had melted. This little discovery led to Spencer having a patent on the microwave oven. Today, this appliance has become a necessary item for most kitchens. Millions of people reach for potato chips when they want a quick snack. Their crispy, salty, and savory flavor can definitely help to curb an appetite. We can all thank Chef George Crumb for this lovely, tasty treat. Crumb was dealing with one of his New York restaurant customers who was complaining about the fried potatoes being too soggy and thick. In response, he got upset and cut the potatoes into extremely thin slices, fried them, and then sprinkled some salt on top. It soon became a hit, and he had no idea that he would create one of the world's most popular snacks. In 1895, a German scientist named William Conrad Röntgen was trying to create light bulbs by experimenting with cathode ray tubes. As he was doing the experiment, he noticed that the cathode tubes that were placed in a box were continuing to emit light even though the box should have stopped it. He realized that the tubes were not only emitting light, but they were also passing invisible rays that had penetrated solid matter. After some human experiments proved to be successful, X-rays then became available in the medical field in order to check for broken bones. Our parents and society have told us not to be messy, but sometimes it can be beneficial. Just take the example of Alexander Fleming. In 1928, he was in a rush to go on vacation and he left his lab in a complete mess. He had left petri dishes with bacteria in them, and when he got back 2 weeks later, he noticed something interesting. They had mold on them, and as he cleaned the mold off, he noticed that the bacteria had been killed. As he studied the mold, he saw that one particular substance was responsible for getting rid of the bacteria. Since that time, penicillin has been used to save millions of people. In the late 1950s, Wilson Greatbatch grabbed the wrong type of resistor out of a box while he was trying to build an oscillator to record the heartbeat sounds of animals. When his creation was turned on, he noticed that it produced a signal that mimicked the human heartbeat. As a result, he created the implantable pacemaker, which many people have benefited from. George de Mestral was a Swiss engineer who also enjoyed hiking with his dog. After returning from one of his hikes, he noticed that some little burrs were sticking to both his dog and his pants. Upon looking at the burrs a little more closely, he noticed that they had small hooks. These little hooks would cling to anything that was loop-shaped. He quickly realized the potential of this newfound discovery as a new fastener. Today, we now know his discovery as Velcro. During World War II, rubber became an essential item for engine parts, boots, raincoats, gas masks, tires, and so much more. But there was one problem. Japan had interrupted America's rubber supply chain from Asia. As a result, the U.S. government contracted companies to help create a synthetic replacement. A chemist for General Electric named James Wright was one of many people working on this project. In 1943, he accidentally created a putty-like material when he mixed boric acid with silicone oil. He noticed that this new substance had strange properties. It could be stretched, modeled, or bounced, but it certainly was not a replacement for rubber. Wright had an abundance of this new strange substance, and he would bring it out at parties to entertain guests. In 1949, it caught the attention of a guest at one of those parties. It was a toy store owner named Ruth Fallgatter. She hired a marketing consultant named Peter Hodgson who packaged the putty in plastic containers and started selling it in her catalog. The product was selling, but not as well as crayons, so it wasn't something that the toy store owner wanted to keep pursuing. However, Hodgson believed in it. He licensed the product from General Electric, packaged it in tiny eggs, and called it Silly Putty. His next step was heading to the New York Toy Fair with some samples. When a journalist played with it, he was amazed and he wrote a story about it. This caused an avalanche of orders, and kids everywhere were soon playing with Silly Putty. James DeWar was a baker working at the Continental Baking Company in Illinois in 1930 when he created something that would satisfy many a sweet tooth. He normally made strawberry cream-filled shortcakes, but when strawberries were out of season, all of his equipment sat idle. He then came up with the idea of banana cream to fill his sponge cakes and called them Twinkies. They weren't as popular as strawberry, but when World War II broke out, the company had to create a new recipe. Vanilla cream filling, which was similar to cake frosting, was substituted, and it became a huge sensation. Since the product had an absence of any dairy-derived ingredients, DeWar had accidentally invented the bakery snack that wouldn't stale easily. Would it last 50 years? No, but it can last 25 days with ease. In 1826, John Walker was stirring a pot of chemicals. When he pulled his wooden stir stick out of the pot, he tried to wipe the glob of chemicals on the table. But the chemicals did not wipe off. They ignited. This accidental reaction is how matches were born, and it changed us forever. In 1903, a French chemist named Edward Benedictus was working in a lab when he dropped a glass flask. He quickly noticed that the flask shattered, but it didn't fall apart into a million pieces. Later on, he discovered that if a flask had been filled with cellulose nitrate, then it would provide a protective layer. This was a huge discovery, which is still being used today. Safety glass is used in many applications, and it uses a similar solution in order to make it shatterproof. Harry Coover was a chemist for Eastman Kodak during World War II. He had been tasked with creating a suitable plastic for gun sights when he accidentally created cyanocrylate. Today that is known as superglue. However, its potential wasn't realized until almost 9 years later when Coover was working to develop a heat-resistant polymer for jet airplanes. As it turned out, cyanocrylate was a perfect solution. Next time you use one of these inventions, you can think about how they were created by mistake. There is a lesson here that we can all learn from. Don't be afraid to dream, and don't be afraid to create something better. You just never know. Your mistake could be the next best thing. But you'll never know unless you give it a try. Do you have any special memories with these items? Let us know in the comments below.
And your mistake can be the next innovation. This is one of the final quote of this video. That, by the way, can be useful for our participants in order to find inspirations for their posters. But the let's say, apart from the video, let's say that these stories are for sure fascinating. Uh, on the other hand, the risk is to oversimplify a bit the reality, no? Because we don't want to say or consider mistake as let's say the only ingredient for making innovation. Otherwise, is a mistake itself. So in order to leverage mistake, you have to include them in a kind of process. You have to use them systematically. You have to use them as part of a process. Tom, what is your personal experience with these? I mean, are you familiar with process methodologies that can transform mistake into a value?
Yeah, no, I agree that we have to watch out for simplification. Yeah, I mean, the video was very interesting. Actually, it made me hungry because there were a lot of food examples, from chocolate chips to cookies and so on. But I think indeed some of these examples might lead to a much more nuanced concept of what an error and a mistake could contribute to a larger innovation. And when I bring that back to the work, you will see that there's a rise of a whole bunch of different methodologies that focus a lot on a process. But what is different than before is that we're not thinking anymore on a linear process. In the past, we would think, okay, we have a problem. So we start from the analysis, then we go to step 2. We try to design potential concept. We basically move over to the development, put into production, see how it works, goes into evaluation. And the project cycle, for example, for me in working in learning and training, that would be the ADI cycle, where we move from analysis towards evaluation, from step 1 towards step 2 towards a successful product. What have we seen is that if we think so linear, that we often get stuck into analysis paralysis, that the reality is much more complex, that we get new insights while we are busy designing. So what changed a lot is that we moved everything into a much more circular, iterative process. I think in the world that where art and learning could be considered together, there's a whole movement around design thinking, which also is based upon an iterative process with a whole bunch of continuous feedback loops, where we basically have these kind of small, you cannot call it errors, but things that happen, we readjust and we move basically forward. Here the risk is, of course, like design thinking, that's not just playing around with some post-its, that's really a sophisticated process with different steps, different things to take into account. And this is just one possible approach to tackle new problems, to come up with new solutions. I think there are many other methodologies out there. What I think is the common ground, that they see the reality as based upon much more complexity, much more uncertainty. We do not know what is going to happen in about tomorrow or the day after. A reality which requires for continuous adaptation, a reality that is basically all the time coping with change at any moment. And therefore, we need to readjust our things. So error or mistake would be translated in something what I would call, if we would call F.A.I.L as an abbreviation, it would be, let's say, your first attempt in learning, your feedback that you're getting, and then immediately adjusting towards the feedback loop, and that will generate action, reaction, other stuff, and we continuously move on in the process. So that's a very much simplified, on how I would see a methodology or a process as part of whatever. If I develop a new product or develop a new service, or if I develop a new or think about a new kind of policy, that's where I think also the concept of error and mistake could come in. Maybe we use some technical terms to describe that, but what is important, it's not just, me experimenting with some food and then have a new kind of solution. No, it's actually part of my vision. part of my mindset, part of how I go through a specific process. And I think the problems that we're facing today are all complex problems, whether it goes from climate change towards labor migration towards informal economy. I think these kind of new mindsets will be needed in order to come up with new ideas, and not just the old mindsets where we go from analysis towards, paralysis, or where we go from step 1 towards step 10 with, let's say, a very straight, almost engineerial manual. That's very difficult these days, and that's why we have to have a bit more openness for, let's say, these kind of new concepts.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, and also you touched many important topics. I mean, the non-linearity, that is one of the key part of this reflection. The complexity, of course, the iterative approach now is probably part of our DNA in most of the innovation and methodology fostering innovation. I mean, in corporate, in design, wherever. I mean, we have always this loop, and fail as a paradigm of first attempt learning is also very interesting as a way to proceed. Let me say my personal background is more in ICT, also startup environments, and it's about probably 20 years that we are trying to push startups towards the way of lean startup. No, and in lean startup, one of the pillar is fail fast and fail cheap. No, because in this way you are validating in the fastest way possible your assumption, no? And probably for a startup is easier. I mean, because it's temporary institution. It's designed to be lean, and designed to be very focused on a specific topic, on a specific opportunity in the market. What is your experience with big organizations or big institutions? I mean, United Nations is something that is definitely not lean in terms of bureaucracy. I can imagine. Maybe I'm wrong, but probably, I mean, for a big organization is probably difficult to implement this approach based on let's say fail fast and fail soon approach. Is it?
Yeah, no. You made a point there, because like big UN agencies or big organizations, there's usually the big issue is there that there's a very low risk appetite. That would be, let's say, the first kind of element. Although there's an awareness that is coming there. I mean, if I hear our Secretary General Gutierrez really making a statement that 21st century problems cannot be solved by 21st century problems cannot be solved by 20th century tools and approaches, then I mean, I would say the awareness is out there. Now, how can you operationalize agility, leanness into a big organization? I think there the let's say the fine recipe will be that you will have to translate some of the underlying approaches into very concrete tools, because any methodology I was mentioning on design thinking, actually now part of, let's say, the UN 2.0 is also now strategic foresight or behavioral insights. If you look at these kind of approaches, there's a big scientific background on how it basically works. And I think you need to introduce these kind of new methodologies that are very, say like, look, this is scientifically very rigorous. This actually leads to evidence-based results out there. And that's the way how you basically could start to implement this. But again, you need to, it's a mindset change. For me, it's almost, I would talk about change management. Are people ready for that? Sometimes they say that they're ready, but then in practice, they won't do it. So it will be a kind of a cultural shift that needs to happen over the long term. And of course, when you speak about the United Nations, that's not one organization, there are many different organizations. So I have super interesting innovation labs across the entire system that I can say they are really advancing in using these kind of new methodologies. And I also have examples where I said like, maybe there it's a little bit more stuck by bureaucracy. So I think you need to create a kind of a new language that within, let's say, the safety of a big organization that is needed, where the risk appetite is low, gets accepted and gets adopted. And for me, that is also a long-term process. It's not just, hey, wow, we have a new methodology or a new tool, we will implement it, because it basically influences the entire way that your organization works. And that's going to be a little bit the challenge. We said like we need to have project planning tools that are now adapted to complexity. So there's this whole movement of complexity adaptive thinking. We have tools as such as social network analysis, all very things that are integrated in the organization. But then you need to report back towards the results, and we have our traditional log frames or our traditional linear tools out there. So there's a little bit of tension, and I think it's healthy tension, because bit by bit people are going to be convinced that a different way of working is needed. That's also why the Secretary General launched an innovation toolkit to do different things and to do things differently. And that's where we can bring in these kind of new concepts, but maybe under different names, because error or mistake, historically, it's defined as something negative. And that's why we need to create, again, a much more rich visual or conceptual language about it, so that people would accept it more and that they can see this is the way that we should work in the future. And interesting, as you said, IT or coding, that's already 20 years. The other sectors also have been adopting these approaches much longer. But I think still it's a continuous thought, because you work with humans, not with machines. And that's still something that we will need to envisage. It's not just, the direct implementation or linear implementation from a new cool methodology that is hyped, and every year it gets a new name. Now it's lean, agile, doing scrums, all these different kind of things. I think we also need to look beyond the hype cycle of these kind of tools and see what are the common ingredients that make sense in an age where we need to co-create, where we need to communicate, and where we need to collaborate.
Tom, you touched a very interesting point. I mean, it's not easy, but I mean, you can try to create this culture for, say, failure, or for accepting the failure. But then probably people are not so well prepared to tell their mistake, or tell their errors. While this is very important, because of course, if you hide the mistake, hide the error, you are missing an opportunity to understand something. You are missing the opportunity to maybe redesign a process in order to avoid this mistake. So, I mean, you mentioned it probably in one of the meeting we had before, this format for an event where you have to can you say something about this? I think it's interesting.
Yeah, that's actually my own big failure, if I have to communicate it right now. Because when we were introducing new methodologies to talk in a safe way about failure, we said, like, look, we are a bit tired in organizing knowledge fairs, because what happens there, everybody is focused on best practices, interesting practices, and basically everybody wants to show off with their success. And actually, everybody is basically repeating itself, that it becomes boring. And so we had the idea, what if we, instead of a knowledge fair, we do a kind of a fail fair? So all the different organizations can present their failure and highlight what they have learned from it. So that was actually a concept, and my whole team, this is super cool, this is interesting, this is innovative. The funny thing, when we send out the invitations for the fail fair, almost nobody replied. And we said, like, did it not arrive? And no, there was just this kind of, I'm a little bit ashamed to basically position my cool project as a kind of a failure. So our failure was that, again, the public that we were serving was not ready for the current language. And we should not have talked in terms of failure and error. And that's, again, why I'm very looking forward to this Poster Heroes competition, because are there other ways that we could represent this? Because I'm pretty sure that I could have convinced the people to come up with, instead of a failure, something what they extremely learned a lot from. And this was maybe a failure, but I should not have labeled it as a failure. But anyhow, I was very happy. It was my own personal failure where I learned a lot from. And now maybe some of the entries from the Poster Heroes competition will be for me a new way of communicating about failure or error that gives people at least this kind of safe zone in which they want to showcase and share with the world what they have learned from their failures, if I can call it failures. That would be my personal
Cool.
failure example.
And in fact, I mean, one of the let's say usage of our poster is also communicating in the good way the complexity of the theme behind the brief. So happy to help in this activity. I mean, you also touched an important point about the culture, because the culture plays a very key role in this game. Let's say I'm Italian, and I know the difference between the Italian perception of failure and the American perception of failure. No, because probably it's pretty straightforward. I mean, in Italy there is this stigma about the people that failed in business or failed in any activities. In US, mainly in the on the West Coast or on New York or whatever, there is this myth about, okay, you failed in the past, you are a good potential winner in the future. No, what about the other countries? Do you have any experience with other culture or other approach, other different perception about the mistake topic?
Yeah, no. Well, I think that culture dimension will be extremely interesting to explore because also sometimes it's also an easy way that could lead to fast stereotypes, like the one in the USA, the eternal startupper that learns from his mistakes. But then if you look behind the scenes on what really happened, the reality is always more gray than the white and the black, because I've been working in some Asian countries. I'm not naming one specific thing, but error would be there's something that you could be really, that's something that you would lose your face, your reputation of it. But again, it depends on how you talk about it and how you basically present it. I think for me that interculture or dimension of Poster Heroes will be an extremely important one to grasp, let's say, the concept of error at its largest level. And I would not, even within a country, there's so many different perceptions out of it. What I'm missing is a little bit, a more nuanced view on it. And I think that's one of the advantages of going through a kind of a visual approach. Usually imaginations does not have boundaries, but also visual language will not get stuck into binary thinking. I would say it's not either the one or the other. It's not 0-1. It's not the good or the bad. And I think even we might have some very strange or interesting visual reflections about what an error could mean in Italy versus in the United States. But a lot has to do with language. That's something that I have learned. And maybe we will get a richer language again through this competition. I'm going to give you the very simple example. When we did this Poster Heroes competition a few years ago on the concept of slow learning, the first stereotype, if you would type in slow learning in Google, it would be slow learning would be seen as something negative because these are the people that cannot catch up and that are not up into the regular average population. So these are the ones that learn very slow. What we tried to obtain was that slow learning was if you visualize it, completely different. If it goes against the whole fast food thinking culture, and it actually brings you back into the reflective mood where you much have a deeper sense of what learning could mean. And these, again, 40 winning visuals of Poster Heroes gave a completely different mindset about what slow learning potentially could mean. And I think that's exactly the objective. Again, what if we look through 40 different multidimensional cultural language sector lenses through that concept? And specifically in the age of today, when I was looking at those examples in the video, it's usually you learn from one field towards another field. The penicillin example was actually a very good one. And I think we need to dive much more into interdisciplinary thinking to come up with these kind of new ways of, finding new insights. And that will not happen when we stick within the same culture, language, job, discipline, or anything out there. There are now some new movements of interdisciplinary thinking. Biomimicry is one of them. What can you learn from nature and expand it towards the field of your own engineering or whatever question you are working on? And maybe that's also this kind of cross-pollination of poster heroes that will help us to think and to communicate in a much more detailed way that handles reality in all its complexity and does not simplify it towards a new, a very simple example.
Nice. Well, we have some people connected, and of course, if there is any question from our audience, we are open to take the question, and we can discuss it with Tom. Among our participants, probably many of them are from the creative sectors, designer, visual designer, product designers. My personal opinion is that probably those people are well positioned as a kind of champion to promote a positive vision of error. Would you agree on this statement? I mean, do you think that creative people are good people to be the ambassador of a failure culture?
Yeah, no, I think that specifically if you also define creativity as not something, I'm just brainstorming on a cool idea. Usually these people, and if I've seen from their own fields of expertise, they also go through a whole very iterative process of preparing their designs, thinking about some of the new ideas. And what I like is that usually there are no boundaries towards a visual idea. You can go in a big experimental way towards it. So I would invite all the creatives that are going to work on this campaign, don't put any limits to yourself and what kind of ideas you could come up with. What I also find is that creatives also, they embrace uncertainty, because it's really in that field of uncertainty that new things pop up unexpectedly. It's, the concept of what I would call serendipity, these kind of things that pop up. You were not looking for it, but in your whole deep dive into something, you found something what you exactly need. And I think creatives are much more open towards, let's say, these kind of approaches to come up with new ideas rather than a very rational, logic, linear process where you go through the kind of different steps. This does not mean that the approach is unorganized. It just means it's opening up. It also follows its own process, its own speciality, its own expertise. And I think at the border of, this kind of uncertainty, complexity, and thing, there's going to rise a lot of cool new ideas that I'm looking forward to see. Actually, the video that you have shown, I would also invite all the creatives to look towards the Museum of Failure, which was originally based in Sweden, but it's a whole collection of many more errors and failures, also very scientific ones that were made. We talk about posters. Post-its is one of the first examples where the unorganized professor was basically trying to find the strongest glue in the world. And with his messy desks full of little papers, he said, shit, my experiment did not work. But then combining the two ideas, actually bad glue with a lot of paper mess resulted into $1 billion industry. And I think these kind of examples of combinatorial thinking, creatives are extremely good in it. And also don't look at it just at products. The World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee example, I don't say it's a failure, but also he was not looking to invent the World Wide Web. He was busy with a completely different project on basically information management, which finally led also to the invention of the World Wide Web. So allow this kind of serendipity, build it into how you're going to prepare your poster. Put yourself into an environment where it could be transformed into intentional serendipity to come up with many poster ideas that you can have. And then maybe after it was Thomas Edison that was also in that video, said like, I have not failed, I just found 10,000 ways that won't work. So even if you have to come up with 10,000 ideas for a poster, there will be one that might be, your single entry point, which hopefully leads to a winning poster for this new edition. Over to you, Christian.
Yes, no, I mean you anticipated my one of my last questions, because you already provided some good source for inspiration, no, for our potential participants, because we know that at the end the people are preparing their posters in the last 10 days, more or less, because this is the statistics. No, we are receiving most of the posters in the very last days of the contest. But I think it's a good way, this call, this session, to push some source of inspirations for them. And I mean, this museum, for instance, is a good way to find inspiration for their posters. There is a comment from Mexico. Let me read it. I think we should see experimentation in life and everything we do as a playful approach to making mistake. This allows us to create better solutions and discard options before selecting the best one. Yes, definitely this is what we are discussing. Thanks for this comment, and thanks for watching us from Mexico. This is great. I mean, happy to have you in this session. To wrap up this webinar, would you? I mean, if you have the chance to speak to our participants, or to leave a message to our participants for their future participation, or for their, let's say, for their future in general, in the sense to leverage this opportunity and take the best from this complex world, what is the message would you like to share to them?
Don't listen to anything what I've said, because they have to find it out themselves as a first thing. I would say, no, I'm joking, but what I'm really keen to invite them, and that's why I'm really looking forward to see, is like, I mean, they could be part of a new language that exists on errors. I like the comment from the Mexican person that says, we need to do it in a playful, experiential, live-based way. That is actually a very good starting point. Look, just do a little rewind of your own life and look at it with, where you encountered errors, and think of maybe how you could see the situation basically different. That's why me, as a specialist in learning, I'm trying also to see what could failure mean for learning. And the big universities are doing research on that, and how I could basically transform it into something transformational, as you mentioned in the beginning. I will also share an article from the Harvard Business Review on strategies for learning from failure. That's like done from my own perspective on how I can see failure different. So my call would be to all the artists, and here we could see error and failure in its broadest sense, could be linked to many different areas of thinking, and see where can we have this kind of cross-pollinating approach in bringing a new visual language. And maybe it can do a small change, maybe in your own personal level, but then also maybe a systemic change also when these ideas go further. If I look to, for example, the whole circular or the whole ecological movement, on how they basically try to reuse waste as a potential driver for new regenerative production of things, this kind of circular economy idea, how could we transpose that model on, I don't say on circular economy or on a regenerative ecology, but how could we transpose that towards the whole field of errors, failures, so that we generate new value out of something that was technically seen not of value anymore. So maybe there a new paradigm, a new language, new tools, new approaches may arise beyond, let's say, the already popular approaches from agile, lean thinking and so on. So I want a much more rich language, and that can only come from creatives that participate with this edition.
Cool. This is also our hope. I mean, to extend the limitation of our language and tool. Let's see if if in this selection of posters that will be awarded, we will have some good inspiration for the future. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time this evening. Super appreciated, and also thanks to ITCILO for supporting Plug and particularly Posterior's contest. I mean, we know that your role is very, very important, and we are also trying to promote this little small little big initiative, let's say, also in United Nations. We will see if we are succeeding in this adventure. Let me close with two important remarks for our audience. The first one is, don't forget the next session. We have still one important partner to present, this Time to Foundation, and you will meet Time to the next week with our president, Silvia Balbeo. And most important, don't miss the deadline of the contest that actually is August 4, if you plan to participate in our contest. Thank you so much for, yes, please, if you want
That's
to.
the only mistake that they cannot make. The deadline is holy, so they cannot trespass the deadline.
Okay, of course. Thank you so much again, Tom. Thank you so much for all the people that connected to us and then probably watch as a on-demand video in the future. And have a nice evening. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.